Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everyone, where depending on where you're staying. Welcome to the GWOPA Congress session on monitoring, what for, and why. We would like to welcome you to this session from the GWOPA Secretariat team and the Alliance. With this session, we would like to address critical issues that have been emerging during the previous sessions in the Congress that relate to, of course, the impact of WOPs. Where do we see the impact? Everyone seems to be very pleased and very happy, want to support WOPs, and seem to know that WOPs are making good progress. But we are failing to show the visibility of such results. With the session of today, we would like to engage the different speakers, the audience, in different approaches that we are all looking into to address that gap. And for that, we have a lot of nice experiences and initiatives that we'll be presenting today. My name is Maria Pascual, Program Management Officer at GWOPA. Also, there are some specific guiding rules that we would like to emphasize for the session. You can see in the audience that you have a chat that you can see on your right hand of the screen. You can post any question there, and we encourage you to do so, please. We'll be seeing the questions on the screen. If beyond that you would also like to speak, there is also the option for you to click on the wish to speak button that you will see in the right side bottom corner below the screen. So if you wish to speak, please press that button and we'll allow you. Especially in the discussions moments, it's very nice to hear people. You will find the translation option and the simultaneous translation that you have at the right up side of the screen, and you can see translation in different languages. And I think that is all that I would like to start the session with, welcoming you all, and now giving the floor to our moderator, Juliana Ferrero, who has nicely agreed to moderate the session today. Juliana has over 15 years experience in the water sector, sanitation, hygiene, and specifically in the fields of water quality, water safety, water reuse, and water treatment. She has been leading education, research, capacity building projects in Mozambique, Uganda, Lebanon, Malawi, Suriname, Georgia, Rwanda, Ethiopia, and many countries. And she recently transitioned into freelancing consulting after having been in UNESCO HE for many years as associate professor lately. She holds a PhD and an MSc in environmental science and a master's degree in experimental geology and an MSc in environmental engineering. So thanks a lot, Juliana, for accepting participating and engaging in the discussion and moderating it. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Maria, for your kind introduction, and welcome everybody. I'm really excited about this session, and I think that is a session that is not only good for people engaging in WOPs and specifically in monitoring, but is broadly a session that is very valuable for anyone that has been dealing with monitoring and evaluation in projects, but also people that are dealing with the water sector in general, because capacity building is actually present in every single level of this work that we're doing. So I would like to welcome you and tell you good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. And I will start immediately by introducing the great lineup of speakers that we have here today. So I hope you can see my screen well. Okay, so we have 4 speakers today. The first speaker that we have is Ms. Anke Verheij. She is the Waterworks Program Coordinator at Vitens Evides International. Waterworks is a program that brings together all 10 Dutch water utilities and more than 35 operators across the globe. with the objective to provide sustainable access to clean drinking water to 10 million people. She has experience in Asia and Africa in the fields of integrated water resources management, urban drinking water supply, and governance. Anke has been involved in WOPs for 5 years. She spent 2 of those years in Vietnam in the framework of a water operator partnership. Our second speaker is Mr. Karl Kamstra. He has been working for Vitens Evidence International since 2008. He is currently the resident project manager of a project that focuses on the performance enhancement of water utilities in the Philippines. In the past, he implemented numerous short missions for various WOPs in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Carl supported water utilities in financial planning and analysis, business planning, management information systems, and commercial reporting. Our third speaker is Dr. Jean Cole. She is the WOP advisor at WaterAid. She has a doctorate in civil engineering, specializing in water resources planning and management. She has 8 years experience working with utilities in the water industry and 4 years experience working in the e-learning industry prior joining WaterAid. At WaterAid, she facilitates the development and scaling of new and existing WOPs. And last but not least, Ms. Maria Pascual, she is the program officer at GWOPA UN Habitat. She has a background in environmental sciences and holds an MSc in water services management and an MBA. After 6 years dedicated to urban environmental consultancy, she specialized in WOPs, to which she has dedicated the last 14 years of her career. First, working for WEI, collaborating in knowledge management and supporting projects in the field, and then working for IHE, researching and lecturing on WOPs. Since 2015, she is responsible for the strategic area of knowledge management at GWOPA. So we give the speakers a virtual round of applause before we start. Now we'll go to the agenda. We will be together for about 1.5 hours to 2 hours, depending on how many questions we will get from the audience. And we will start our agenda with a brief introduction to WOPs monitoring and reporting practices, and that will be given by Maria. Following that introduction, we will ask our speakers to reflect on one question. So, why monitoring and reporting and what for? So all the speakers will be invited to share their reflections, and I also invite you, if you're willing, to share your reflection about this specific question in the chat, and I will be very happy to go through your comments as well. After this, we will move on to the experiences. So we have very valuable experience here today shared by our practitioners, and we will go into zooming into their presentation. So we will learn about their practices, the lessons learned, and their suggested way forward for future WOPs monitoring systems. So there will be a first presentation by Anke, explaining to us the learnings from Waterworks Phase 1 and the new approach that they will be using for monitoring and evaluation in Phase 2. Then we will have Carl that will be reflecting on the knowledge consolidation self-assessment methodologies that has been used in the Philippines. We will move on with the presentation given by Jean on the lessons learned from monitoring practices in WaterAid's WOP. And finally, we will conclude with a presentation about the key elements of GWOPA's proposed WOPs result framework. Again, in this session, we will have questions asked at the end of each presentation. So once again, please post your questions in the chat, and then I will be happy to raise the questions to the speakers. Nevertheless, if we still have some questions remaining, we also have a space at the end for an open discussion and more Q&A. So now, without further ado, I think that we can move forward with the presentation of Maria. So I will stop sharing my screen now and give the floor to Maria. Maria, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Juliana, for this nice guidance on how the session will run. Let me share my screen. Is it visible right now? Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, well, with this presentation, I would like to set a bit the scene on why this session, what is the current practice that we've observed in monitoring and reporting for WOPs. Yesterday, it was really very interesting and good to hear several quotes from donors and international financial institutions emphasizing what we know, what we mentioned before, and that's that we really need to show results. We all have the sense that WOPs are really supporting in organizational capacity development, but that's yet not visible. Some of the quotes that we could hear are from, for example, European Investment Bank saying, whenever, in the cases where we have a WOP that aligns in timing with an investment program, we feel the security that those investments are going to be sustained with time, given that support on capacity development that utility is also receiving. We heard also other donors saying, well, we've been supporting WOPs for many years, and we know they're working, but we cannot prove that they're working. And that's something that it's a recurrent, if you want to say, remark that key stakeholders for the upscale of WOPs are sharing with us. So just to start the session, just coming back to the trends that we see. And here we can see that, yes, WOPs keep increasing and keep happening. Not only that, but there is an emphasis lately on South-South WOPs, which of course have the potential, and triangular as well, have the potential to be more cost effective in many ways because of the cultural setup sharing, because of the similar challenges that they share, and the triangular cooperation, that kind of architecture in which both the benefits of both worlds come together in a WOP. So that's happening more and more, and we are very happy to see that. When we also saw yesterday that in terms of regions, there are different trends in different regions. What we see in Africa is where we have the longer term WOPs and of course the more budget dedicated to it, while in Latin America and Asia and the Pacific we see smaller term WOPs with less budget. Of course, we can conclude that yes, there is more budget and more funding going to Africa's WOPs, and you can see that, of course, there the long-term character of the WOPs is also going to be reflected in the achieved results that we will be seeing. Similar, we can see here that there is a great diversity of WOPs in terms of costs or budgets for the project, and a great diversity in terms of duration. And why I paint this picture initially at the session is because of the need to emphasize that, of course, we cannot expect the same kind of results from a short-term WOP of less than a year with a budget of maybe $50,000 than what we can expect from the long-term WOP that even lasts, as we will see later in the program, more than 3, 4, 5 years, or even now with the unprecedented of Waterworks program, with a programmatic commitment of lasting until 2030. So there is a wide diversity of WOPs, and we have to be considering this aspect when looking for results. That doesn't mean that the short-term WOPs are not going to give us results, are not going to lead to relevant results for the recipient water operator. We're just saying that, of course, we have to distinguish what we can expect. What happens here is that when we look at, from GWOPA side, when we look at the picture that we can paint in terms of results, is very little the information that we get. The same way as we've been showing different trends from our role in trying to capture when are WOPs happening, how much funding, which are the partners, etc. We are tracing that, but it is very difficult for us at the moment still to trace results. And we have a lot of information, but not so much about results. And so then the question comes, why are we not making results of WOP more visible at the global level? Of course, we look at ourselves, UWOPA from the Secretariat, but we look at the Alliance in general and also at all the stakeholders working in WOPs. There is something that we need to do together in order to really show the good progress and positive achievements of WOPs at the global level. Now, some identified causes. The first one is, of course, not all WOP projects are good enough to lead to results. There are also WOP projects that fail because of design issues, because of partner commitment issues, because of funding issues, because of a great range of issues that can lead to a project to fail. Okay. Another one that was yesterday mentioned by Danielle from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is the constraints derived from project cycle boundaries in terms of funding, in terms of time, and what we can nicely see in WOPs lately, and more, is the relational aspect that differentiate WOPs and the partnership. It really is making a difference in terms of the commitment of partners beyond the project cycle, beyond the initial funding available, beyond the initial time that was scheduled. And projects themselves and partners themselves are the ones looking for additional resources to continue that commitment and that exchange in time. Okay, so we can see that WOPs are already breaking that cycle and trying to go beyond. Other of the clear cause is that donors, key stakeholders, and global frameworks are typically keeping WOPs accountable for a type of results that are not the type of results that WOPs are aiming for in terms of outcomes. On one hand, we have donors that accept outputs as the results of WOPs, and they feel that that's good enough. When we know that outputs are related to the project, you can deliver many outputs, trainings, equipment, plans, a lot of outputs that the project can be anticipated and submitted perfectly, and yet the mentee operator does not benefit from the project. So outputs are not enough. Outputs are good and informative for project management, but they are not where we are having the impact. They do not show how WOPs are making an impact on the recipient side. And then we have the other side of the spectrum with the performance myopia. And we see that in global frameworks. We see that from key stakeholders that we have to be accountable for, be donors, be other key stakeholders that are only looking into, for example, the SDG 6 or Part A, access to water supply, just as an example. Well, I'm sorry, WOPs work through capacity development. And capacity development is the first short and term impact that you can explore and that you can see visibly from WOPs. And only with time and with many conditions that are supporting, then you will get to that performance improvement. So we also have to shake a bit the frameworks that we are being imposed to some extent and show the value that capacity enhancement has for sustainability of the services that we are providing. There has been a historical trend and historical experiences where there has been a lot of investments, a lot of improvements in service for a few years, and then, of course, the decline because there is no capacity to maintain that infrastructure. So please, let's try to emphasize what's the added value of WOPs and try to use the appropriate lens to talk about WOPs. Now, the myth of the developed capacity as a black box. No, everyone, whenever, how do we measure capacity? It's not possible. I've seen a lot of reports in which, and evaluation reports from WOPs in which say, well, yes, they deliver the outputs. Yes, a little bit of KPIs were improved, but on the capacity aspect, which was also an objective, we cannot prove that has been enhanced because there are no specific methodologies that are being applied to these projects that are suitable to measure capacity. And of course, because they are more complex methodologies that then just relying on on the output, which is very easy to get delivered, or the KPIs, which are on the other side of the spectrum, measured generally by the water utility itself, and then you can see what's the value of those. Also, just to make their clarification, a lot of the times those KPIs and the reliability of the accurately of those KPIs, we know that it is also not necessarily reliable. So the myth of the capacity development as the black box is also an issue. Then the lack of WOP responsive M&E approaches, where key stakeholders that are involved in the WOP movement, in the WOP approach, are able to distinguish between capacity and performance outcomes, and also acknowledge that it is not just any type of project, that it's a partnership project. And the partnership quality, the way in which the partnership is managed is critical for the success and the impact of the project. So that's something that is still missing. In the session today, we will see very interesting ideas and approaches, but it's one of those causes of let's say, the invisibility of results that we have till now. Another one is that there hasn't been enough, there has been coordination, but arguably not enough coordination between GWOPA and WOP practitioners in general on methodologies applied, data collected, and data sharing procedures for results so far. We have coordinated to get, as I said before, information on WOPs, partners, funding, etc., but not yet on results, and that's where we are heading. And then a final point that I would like to highlight, and that at times also applies, is that water professionals are water experts, and they are not yet familiar with capacity development monitoring methodologies, and they are not necessarily reporting lovers, and sometimes they don't even have time for it. Their time is better spent supporting and working with their partner. So that's also something that we have to make easy on our side. We need to make easy for them how to monitor and report in an easy way. So those are some of the identified causes, and there might be many more that I would like to address today. Some of them I already addressed them through this initial talk. But in this intro and setting the scene, I will touch upon those two issues. The key imposed, let's say, results framework, and the myth of the black box of capacity development. Okay, first point being the historically accepted approaches to M&E that are not tailored to the nature of WOPs. 3 points on this one that I briefly already mentioned. Outputs are not implying that there is any benefit on the mentee side. Outcomes, KPIs are really not to be used as a proxy for capacity. You can have service delivery and not have capacity. There are a lot of shortcuts to service delivery, but if the capacity is not there, if you take a shortcut by an external capacity substitution, for example, or an investment without capacity to support it, then that service is going to drop eventually. So please, let's not use key performance indicators as a proxy for capacity developed, because they do not correlate and they can be very misguiding. Let's use them as a guiding light rather, but not as a proxy for capacity development. And then the other element that I would like to highlight is on the process. As I said before, this is not just any technical assistance, I deliver, I leave. No, this is meant to be the spirit of WOPs. It's a long-term trust building, partners commitment project that ideally aims at breaking the boundaries, if needed, of course, the boundaries of the project cycle. And as such, the monitoring frameworks that we need to be using need to also be looking at this aspect, at the partnership side of things. How is the partnership working? How are partners collaborating? Because if that added value from working in a partnership is not materialized, then of course that's going to revert negatively on the results achieved. Now, let's go into the black box myth of enhanced capacity. No, it's not possible to measure. Well, it is possible to measure, and there has been a lot of research going into that. There are new methodologies, but yes, there are more complex methodologies. It's not as easy as just taking the KPIs information from the water utility. No, we have to make an effort. But also the need for that, as we've been hearing from donors, but also later on we will see other motives, the need for that is really great. So let's make that effort together. Now, when we look at what happens, interestingly, when we look at reports on results, reports about WOPs that are extensively and rich in terms of monitoring what has happened, we see those capacity enhancement results. We see them. It's only that we see them in a qualitative manner, and it's just very difficult to show and to communicate on one hand, and very difficult to trace how it evolves with time. So those are elements that we really need to also capture in our future practice for monitoring and giving visibility to results. An example here, or I'm just illustrating here, for example, the type of results that we've seen when we look at reports of WOPs that have qualitative information. What we've seen in general is that WOPs lead to different results depending if they are short-term, medium-term, or long-term, as well as a long-term WOP will lead to different results in the short-term, medium, and long-term. What kind of results we see? At the beginning, we see nothing. The short-term, medium-term outputs is the only thing we can report if we are not looking at capacity, because any KPI improvement, in most cases, only in the medium term materializes maybe in zones, in specific pilot areas, and only in the long term you will see, if at all, and this is talking about even sometimes longer than 5 years, any improvement in a KPI at the utility level. I'm just putting the example of non-revenue water, which we all are very used to. So if we don't report on outcomes related to capacity, we are blind to what are the impact at the utility level of the WOP. Now, when we look at those reports that I've just mentioned and try to unpack the black box of capacity, what do we see? Okay, we see in the short term, of course, and this is not a blueprint. Of course, there can be and there will be different orders depending on the kind of intervention. But there are some trends. And the short term, you can see generally improved skills of individuals, improved motivation of individuals, improved applied new knowledge and skills of individuals. That's what is more commonly seen in the short term. That's a result. That's already an enhanced capacity if we understand capacity as improved organizational ability to provide good services and sustain it with time. In the medium term, what do we see? We see also many capacity enhancement indicators there. We see improved information about the current systems, which in many occasions in water utilities is not updated. I'm just saying, for example, the conditions of the network is very difficult. The physical losses that you might have, well, that's already an improved capacity, and you are improving the ability of the organization to perform if you have a good picture of what's happening in your system. We also see planning, we also see improved management practices, sometimes even change in organizational structures. The example of a DMA creation for addressing non-revenue water, new equipment. We see a lot of capacity enhancement indicators there. And then in the long term, well, sometimes we see, of course, even improved the resources, as we mentioned before, of the utility, at times as a result of the operational improvement achieved, at times because the project partners have managed to tap into new additional external resources. We see elements of organizational learning. There are some changes in the organization when they go through a WOP or work together in partnership for enhancement of the capacity that lead to better practices in terms of organizational learning, knowledge sharing, applied knowledge. And eventually we see as well changes in organizational routines that with the time will lead to performance improvement. So with this picture, I just wanted to give a sense that, okay, well, that black box is not so black anymore, and we have the possibility to make it visible. It's not easy. We'll have to use different methodologies that we are used to, but it can be done. And I think as a sector, as a WOP movement, as knowing the potential that this approach has, we are going to do our best to support key partners to start making this capacity more visible. And with this, I would like to end the first part of the setting the scene presentation and give the floor back to Juliana.
Thank you very much, Maria. It was a very nice presentation. It was good that you guided us also through the increasing numbers of WOPs and their diversity. I really like your note on normalizing failure. So this is a bigger debate that we're having in the WASH sector, not only in WOPs, but how we can normalize failure and learn from it mostly. So that was a very important point. Then you delved into the reliability of the KPIs and questioned how their use as a proxy for capacity development. So that is a very important point because opens up, the Pandora box of capacity development, the bigger debate that all of us have been involved in this sector are dealing with. So which are the appropriate methodologies for measuring capacity development and capacity enhancement? And lastly, I would like to conclude with a note that I'm yet to find a reporting lover. You mentioned that it's very difficult to have reporting lovers, but I haven't met anyone yet. So thank you, Maria, once again. We can move on now with the roundtable. So the question that I raised at the beginning is why we do monitoring of WOPs and what for. So I would like now to briefly ask our speakers to say what is their opinion about this question. And I would like to ask with Anke, please, if you can share your view on this point.
Yes, thank you, Juliana. For us, we monitor the WOPs because it's very important and it really supports the results of the WOPs and to improve our work. Because we work together with many different partners in our Waterworks program, we can learn from each other. So if we see, for example, that non-revenue water in one of the partner utilities was reduced, then we can learn from these results and it can also be applied to another utility. So it's really about sharing the knowledge of the successful and also the not successful experiences that we have, so that other WOPs can learn from this. On the other hand, it's also about communicating our results. It's about being accountable to the donor, about identifying difficulties and acting upon them, and seeing where there are some difficulties within the WOP so that we can provide some extra support. And all this work, it really feeds into the communities of practice that we have, where this knowledge and these experiences can be shared. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anke. And I think just building on what you were saying, like the accountability to donors, I wonder how much monitoring and evaluation is actually dictated by donors and funding agencies. And I will throw this question also for the next speakers out there. So thank you very much, Anke. I would like now to ask Jean, please, to come up.
Thank you, Juliana. So we under WOPs because one, to show the impacts of these projects to the partners involved, the stakeholders, the donors, but also as Anka mentioned, to learn from our previous experiences and to continuously improve on those. And finally, we monitor at the project level because it's so important for the success of a WOP. Without you need to know where you are at any given time, and what's not. Without monitoring, you don't know. It's hard to pinpoint what is working and what's not. So it's essential for that learning process as well as a WOP. Thank you.
We all agree on that. But what we're always looking at is being accountable to our donors, to our stakeholders, but we often forget the view of the recipient partners. We do the WOPs for them. They have to improve, and for them it's very important, of course, that they can see that they're improving, and they all know their own KPIs. They know the non-revenue water percentages. They know all those data, those KPIs. But for what is important for our partners is also how are we improving on the work processes? How is how are we doing on leadership, which is very often a prerequisite for the other developments. So, in my opinion, monitoring is not only important for our donors and for ourselves, and also the improvement learning from each other, but also for our partners. It's good to also share their vision on the improvements that they do. That's why they entered into a capacity development program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carl. I would like to ask Maria now to conclude with her remarks and her view, of course.
Thank you so much, Juliana, and thanks a lot, my panel colleagues, for all these nice and relevant points. I think also we cannot escape the fact that we come from different type of organizations and with different needs, no? From I think in the case of Carl, project manager, now Anke as a program approach, and then also in the case of Jane also as a program perspective on monitoring. I think those points are really very necessary. GWOPA's case is also incorporating to a great extent what has been mentioned. So on one hand, it is very relevant for us to really monitor not only results, but the practice itself. And I think Anke mentioned a very important point in terms of the knowledge that you can extract from a project can be used in other projects. And that's an effort that also we are trying from GWOPA's side with the creation of an online community that we will have a session specifically on that, in which we are trying to bring the experiences from different practitioners to the table, learn from them, trying to, in the cases where it's suitable, create knowledge products, knowledge services, so that not every project has to reinvent the wheel. So basically, that purpose would be touching upon better WOPs, trying to improve the practice, trying to improve the impact through the monitoring practices in order to get universal access to safe water supply and sanitation. So for us, that would be one objective, better practice. But on the other side, we also have the responsibility and the mandate as GWOPA to upscale the practice. And for this, we really need to be able to, as someone said, prove the concept. We need to be able to prove that the WOPs work. And we cannot do it alone. And that requires the effort from different stakeholders to be able to engage into bringing more visibility so that we can knock on the doors of donors, of different international financial institutions, of governments, to enable, to prepare create an enabling environment for more WOPs to happen in the north, in the south, etc. So I would highlight those two key points from GWOPA's perspective also as very relevant and as the whys for monitoring. Thank you so much.
So thank you very much to all our speakers. It's great to hear that you're all aligned, saying that monitoring is needed, but you all added different nuances to the reasons why that is needed. So we will now move on to the next part of this session, which is actually the core of the session of today, which is learning from the experience of our speakers. So our first presenter will be, let me share again my screen. Can you see it? So apologies for the technical issue. Now you should be able to see my screen. So our first speaker is Ms. Anke Verheij, and she will present the learnings from the Waterworks program phase 1 and the new approach that they will adopt for phase 2. Anke will share my screen, and if you can just say next slide, and I will switch.
Perfect. Thank you, Juliana. So yes, as Juliana explained, I'll be explaining a bit more about the lessons learned of the first phase of the Waterworks program and share on our and introduce you to our second phase and our new approach. Next slide, please. A little bit more about what is the Waterworks program. Some of you might not be familiar with our program, but it's a long-term program between 2016 and 2030 between 10 Dutch water utilities, the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and 39 utilities in cities in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And the first phase of the program is from 2016 until the end of this year. And we are expecting the next phase to start in the beginning of next year. And the main goals of the program is, on the one hand, performance improvement of the water utilities with the aim towards sustainable water services, and also to provide basic or safely managed services to 10 million people in selected cities, of which around 25% live in low-income areas. We do this through WOPs, through the peer-to-peer partnerships that we have between water and also sanitation service providers to improve the operational performance. We also focus on mobilizing and acquiring finance for infrastructure. We work on the enabling environment to sustain results, which we notice is very important for the sustainability of our work. Knowledge management across WOPs and utilities, which I already mentioned a bit. And we focus on staff and organizational capacity development in the performance areas across almost all working processes. Next slide, please. So I'll focus a bit more on the lessons learned of phase 1. And what is perhaps important, also thinking of the slide Maria shared in the beginning on the different budgets of WOPs, is that in the Waterworks program, the average budget for one WOP is around 2 to 3 million euros for the first 4 years. So I think that's important to take into consideration looking at this as well. So yes, the learning from the first phase. In the first phase, this is our result chain. We did a baseline study of all our partner utilities, looked at the input, activities, output, intermediate outcomes, and final outcomes. We decided not to include impact because that's quite difficult to monitor, and that's really the impact on a population. And so we decided to really focus more on the intermediate and the final outcomes of our program. And this was using the same example as Maria in her introduction as on non-revenue water, where the activities that we do is, for example, the creation of DMAs, the preparation of an NRW strategy or plan, and providing training, where the outputs are NRW pilot zones created, and also that is very important is that the people trained in this. And then the intermediate outcomes is reducing NRW in the certain pilot zones, while the final outcome is NRW reduction really at a larger utility level. And next slide. What we noticed in this first phase is that our monitoring was quite output focused. So we focused on the number of people trained, on the number of DMAs created, the number of plans developed, while, of course, what we like to see is a change in behavior and a change in KPIs. So what we like to see is really a focus on the intermediate and the final outcomes. But what we noticed that these behavior changes were quite difficult to monitor. Halfway of the first phase after our midterm review, we changed a little bit the monitoring approach and we developed a behavior indicator tool, looking at planning and working routine, transparency and integrity, management practice, organizational structure and inclusion. So here we had various indicators that we looked at to see if there's a change in planning and working routine, if there's a change in management practice based on the training and the capacity development provided. What we also noticed that significant progress of final outcomes, it takes time. The first phase is now running for about 4 years, and really seeing a change in NRW at utility level, that's something that really takes time. And what we also noticed is that there's a need for proof of concept of the WOP, which Maria also mentioned, what I'm happy about because we can really collaborate on this, I think. But there's a need for this, indeed, to communicate to donors, to financiers, to show, well, what a WOP can contribute to. Next slide. So in Waterworks Phase 2, I see that the timing is not correct, but from 2022 until 2026, so for 5 years, for the second phase, we are proposing a different framework. And next slide. So the second phase of Waterworks, we created a new tool, which we based on the utilities of the future framework developed by the World Bank and by EVA. And based on that, we developed a WOP tool. It's really a planning, monitoring, evaluation, and learning tool to improve project excellence. The inputs, the outputs, and also the final outcomes, so a list of utility KPIs are actually quite similar as we used in phase 1. But what is new is that we are changing the intermediate outcomes into working process maturity. So we want to see here the different maturity changes in working processes. Next slide. So this improvement of working processes, that is really something that is at the core of our WOPs. We aim to support our partner utilities in making step changes in the maturity level of the working processes, and then also the next step in the resulting organizational KPIs. This could mean that an overall maturity level increases from one level to another, or that it also only happens for a number of priority sub-processes that have been selected by the WOP to really focus on. Next slide. So I'd like to share with you a little bit this tool and how it works and how we are planning the project for the second phase. So on the left hand of the slide, you can see the different steps of the WOP tool. And this is on the one hand to really develop the WOP, but also, as I mentioned, to keep on monitoring the progress and changing the focus of the WOP when needed based on the practices. So the first step is to set a project team to ensure the ownership of our partners. So it's a selected team. It includes senior middle management of our partners, operational staff, and also the Dutch short-term experts, and how they are included in the communities of practice that we have. Next, please. So here you can see 11 groups of main working processes, which actually includes all the different departments of the partner utility that are there. So we do an analysis of all these different departments, and here we can see, for example, in this example, you see that asset management and wastewater treatment is scoring a bit lower compared to the other working processes. So that could be a reason to focus on these departments, on these main working processes, or to focus on one of the processes what is already quite advanced. So on a scale from elementary to world class, this is being assessed, and that's also how we are monitoring the progress of the utilities. What is also important is that because we've already been working for 4 years with the partner utilities, we are analyzing this data, these KPI data for 4 years to see what progress have been made and where can we focus on. Next slide. So this to give you a bit of an idea of what this looks like. One of the main processes is called organization and strategy, and we divided this into several sub-processes. And are assessed from a scale, as I said, from 1 to 5, where, for example, in terms of leadership development, 1 is a low score, and 5 is a high score. Next slide. And this goes a bit more into detail on for one of the sub-processes, which is, in this case, long-term climate resilient water supply, where scale 1 is that there's no plan yet, and scale 5 is that there is a plan being implemented, monitoring and evaluated with key stakeholders. So here, with the trainings that we provide, we hope to change these working processes and then to also really see what the WOP contributes to and the capacity skills that are being developed. Next slide. Yeah, so what we do is to see what kind of activities are needed when it comes to a certain work process. We are doing a SWOT analysis, internal and external. So we look at, for example, if we see that one of the sub-processes is going quite low, we are trying to see what is the reason why this sub-process is what it is. Is it because of the skills, the staff, the structure, the strategy? So we look at these 7 S's for an internal analysis, and we do an external analysis as well. Next step, please. And then the final step is really to develop the WOP result chain logic. So some of the sub-processes are being selected to work on, targets are being set, what kind of activities will contribute to that are being written down and developed together with the partners. And this is all brought together in a WOP plan. So it's really focused on the utility turnaround process. So if you have any questions about this, please feel free to contact me, and I'd like to go into a discussion with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anke, for your great presentation. I encourage the audience in posting their questions in the chat. I'm not sure if it's me or I don't see any questions at the moment. However, I listened to your presentation with great interest, Anke, and I have a lot of questions. I will refrain from asking them all. But just starting with a reflection on the complexity of capacity building, like what Maria said in the previous presentation. And from your presentation, we learned about the difficulties encountered in monitoring changes in behavior, right? So was it due to the lack of data or to difficulties in interpreting the data? Can you tell us a little bit more about your experience on why it was so complex to monitor behavior change? I'm not sure, Anke, if you could hear. Oh, yes. Okay.
Yes, sorry, I had to unmute myself. Yes, that at first the behavior change indicators were quite broad, and it wasn't that easy to measure only focusing on a narrative. So we noticed that there was a need for a bit more support in terms of a tool.
Okay, so from what I understand is that it's more the form in which it's the narrative, qualitative information rather than having a quantitative way of measuring things.
It was actually more, the indicators were made a bit more quantitative than qualitative, actually.
Okay, so this is still a big debate, no? How we can integrate better qualitative and quantitative information.
Yeah.
Great. And I do have another question because I still don't see any questions posted from the audience. You mentioned, along the same line that that you developed a framework adapting the work from the World Bank and the IWA. And my question is if that framework is done for all the WOPs, or if there is a certain degree of customization. So if it's done, adapted to certain types of WOPs versus others, or if you use the same framework for all.
We use the same framework for all WOPs, but of course adapted for they are selecting the processes that are relevant for them and like to improve on. So the analysis is the same, but then the selection of sub-processes to focus on differs per WOP.
Okay, I see. Thank you so much, Anke.
Thank you.
If we will have more questions from, sorry, I can see one hand that has been raised by Maria. So Maria, please go ahead.
Thanks a lot, and thanks a lot, Anke, for the nice presentation. I think it's quite impressive, the tool that you've developed, and I'm just concerned with this with this approach, and also just to share for the discussion later. I'm just concerned with having a best practice as predefined for any water utility that you can find in any region, and with different needs, different sources of water, different contextual circumstances, as the reference point for assessment. That's one of my concerns with this. Also, that we know that having like evidence-based approaches like this, when you make an assessment, you might miss a lot of what's ongoing in terms of capacity, in endogenous capacity development within the utility, just because you've just been looking at one good practice statement on one aspect. So I would be a bit concerned about trying to use one best practice framework to assess and to evaluate the maturity of a water utility with just one reference point, and also the extent to which you would see how the WOP contributed to that maturity. Because of course, we know the same way as with performance, that a lot of things happen in a water utility. And most of them are not related to the WOP. There are so many intervening factors and already ongoing things that are not related to the WOP. So that would be then my second question. What efforts are you going to make to try to see how that maturity increase is related or not to the WOP? Thanks a lot.
Yes, thank you. That is a good point. And therefore we are, on the one hand, assessing the entire maturity level of the utility. And we're doing this every 2 years to see the changes. But we also realize that, of course, there are a lot of other things indeed going on. There are other partners working with the utility itself is working on certain processes. And that's why we're also specifically focusing on the sub-processes that we are focusing on. So every 2 years, we are focusing on all the different sub-processes, which are actually 100 in total. But then with the WOP, we only focus on 10. We say because 10 to 20, because on these 10, the change that we see, it's partly contributed by the WOP, but of course not entirely. And of course, there are many other factors to take into account. And that's also what we include in the narrative as well. Then your question about the the best practices. I think because there are so many processes, and because I think the terminology that we use is still quite general. It doesn't mean, it doesn't say, for example, the long-term water supply plan, it should look exactly like this because that's the best practice. Of course, we have experiences that we can use, but it doesn't mean that every utility should have the same type of long-term water supply plan. It depends on the context, but we do think it's important to have a long-term plan. And that's why the step 5 is that there is a long-term plan that is being implemented.
Can I just react very quickly? Yeah. My concern comes not only from the good practice statement, but also from the path that basically you're setting up for a water utility, or to go from maturity 1 to maturity 5. Basically, with 5 good practice statements on a specific sub-process, you're defining what's the path that you should follow. But maybe that path is not the best for every water utility. And I know, of course, that we work with frameworks, and these are proxies, best ways ahead. But I would just maybe when using the tool, I would just be a bit conscious of that in general, that maybe there are underlying issues that make a certain path not be the best one for a utility, not to be a bit flexible in that regard. But I think that it's a tremendous tool that can I personally see it as well as a very useful possible baseline tool to as a guiding baselines, not as used not to be used as a blueprint, but just guiding some baselines, and I think that can also be very useful for that. Thanks a lot.
Okay.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you, Anke. I just see that there's a question that was raised by a member of the audience. Can you say something about the behavior index tool? If you can say something more about it.
Yes, as I explained, there were these 5 different main indicators, and then in the tool, for example, in terms of inclusion, there also, it looks actually a bit like the tool we've developed now, but then only focusing on these few different indicators, is that it's also on a scale of 1 to 5, and then scale 1, it says, for example, that water is the customers of the utility cannot enter or cannot communicate, for example, with the utility, and then there are different steps that give examples also of better of other practices. So for example, if the utility is accessible by wheelchair, yes or no. If the utility is focusing also on the low-income areas and the people that might have difficulties paying their water bill or the connection fee. If the utility communicates in different languages, yes or no. So it gives a lot of examples, moving also from step 1 until step 5, and then to also see a change in this case inclusion, but also for top and middle management practices. We also have a lot of different examples actually of when you are more in 1 or when you're more into to 5. So it looks a bit like the tool that we are now proposing for the second phase, but then only focusing on a few indicators.
Okay, so thank you so much, Anke, and I encourage anyone that is interested in the tools or has any question on Anke's presentation to write her. There was her email in the presentation shown earlier. Okay, so thank you so much, Anke. We will move now with the next presenter. So Mr. Karl Kamstra, he will present his experiences with the self-assessment tool developed in the Philippines. So Karl, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Juliana. I will share my screen. Let's see. I hope you can see it. Is it visible?
Yes,
Yes.
it is.
Okay, thank you. A little bit about the background. I work for Vita and Safeties International, in short, VI. And PWOP stands for the Performance Enhancement Water Utilities in the Philippines
Sorry, Carl.
project. Yeah?
If you can just click the icon of your camera because it stopped working when you shared
Okay,
your presentation.
let me see. Can do that.
Sometimes the system does that automatically in terms of bandwidth, Juliana.
Okay, I see. But now
Am
it
I-
works.
I'm back.
Please.
I'm back. Okay. So yeah, um, a little bit about myself. Karel Kamstra. I worked for VI since 2008. First as short-term expert, as already explained by Juliana. I'm a project manager of the project in the Philippines, and we have partnered with 4 smaller water companies, and they're called water districts in the Philippines. They're public water utilities. Bogo, Toledo City, Cacar, and Bayawan water districts on 2 islands in the central Visayas region of the Philippines. There are smaller water utilities, and for all of them, it was the first time that they experienced capacity building program. So for them, it was all new. And we started in 2018. 2017, we did the assessment, baseline assessment, and we talked about them, what the capacity building program looked like. And here's some information about the water utilities. You can see that the number of household connections in water, and now what the targets are. And also, for example, the NRW percentage and NRW liters per connection per day. So fortunately, we can already see some improvements in some cases. This is just to give you some idea about our partners, very small partners. So what happened after 1 year into the project? The partner utilities fortunately expressed that they were not very comfortable with the strict adherence to their project plan. We developed a project plan together with them, and we started implementing them. But fortunately, they voiced that they were not so very happy because first, for example, they felt overwhelmed with the WOP. We sent in short-term experts. They taught all kinds of new things. They wanted to implement that, but of course they had to do that with limited resources. So they felt very much overwhelmed. And it was also felt that the project plan that we developed was lacking the partner perspective. Of course, we developed the project plan in a very short period of time. After interviewing the water utilities, and they also, of course, said yes to the project plan. But yeah, they because they didn't have much experience, they felt it was not fit to them. So we had a workshop in the beginning of 2019. And we decided to develop a very simple monitoring tool in Excel, which assesses the baseline of the work processes and also the target performance of the work processes that were defined in the project plan. And in the meantime, we would also monitor the actual changes in the work processes. Why the work processes focus? Well, KPIs are already monitored, of course, in the WOP level, but also on the utility level. And it is still, it's mentioned a couple of times already, difficult to monitor the so-called invisible results, the intangible results. And also, there's no direct link very often between the work processes and the KPIs. For example, leadership is a very important focus area to work on, which can influence all the KPIs. And of course, also many KPIs cannot be directly influenced by the WOP. We have some influence, but for example, if there are major investment programs that can also tremendously contribute to the improvement of the KPIs. We wanted to see the partner perspective. So what we did, we developed this tool and we let the partner fill in the monitoring tool. And what that really helped is to help our partners think about the WOP. How can we benefit most of the WOP? So I'll share how we did that. We did a self-assessment, and what we did is that we asked them to fill in the current situation, the baseline, and to fill in what they want to achieve within the duration of the WOP, which was the 4 years. So we use that to prioritize the WOP activities, and in some cases also reschedule the WOP activities. One of the major outcomes of that workshop was also that we decided on collective learning. When we made the project plan, we thought that the needs of the water utilities was more or less the same, and we would do joint trainings. But in that workshop, it appeared that the differences among the water utilities were too big, and that they preferred a one-on-one approach. So that's also a change that happened. What we did at that time, we developed six levels. Level 0 is no decision has been made to start this activity. And number 5, the utility can function as a mentor for other utilities, which was also one of the targets, because in phase 2 we intend to involve more water utilities in the Philippines. So here you can see which levels we used. Then I have to go back. So this is the screenshot of the tool. It's an Excel model. Some very basic information here, and you can see that there are some perspectives. HR management is in the screen, and business planning, investment, etc. So we had the partner score their current level based on the levels that you see in green there, and also the target level they want to achieve in the 4 years time of the WOP, of the first phase of the WOP. And the result was this spider diagram, which in orange is the current level, and the blue one is the target level. And we did some intermediate monitoring as well. So you can see there have been some improvements in some of the areas that we focused on. What is important to know is also that of course we didn't let them fill in all by themselves. We also asked questions and relevant questions, because what you sometimes see is that they either overestimate or underestimate themselves, and also that their targets are usually set very high and not always very realistic. So we try to help them with that as well. So to conclude this, what are the advantages and disadvantages of this system? In my opinion, it's very important to involve the partner and to look at the partner perspective. We focused on the non-tangible or invisible results, and it was a very important basis for discussion and for regular alignment of the WOP to meet partners' expectations, and of course to align with the targets that we have set in the WOP. Of course, the realignment only if it contributes to the end results of the WOP. The disadvantage is, of course, that it's a very subjective measurement, but that's always very hard to measure the intangible or the quantitative results. But it helped us a lot in our project to align very much with the partner expectations, and also to align the partner expectations with the WOP expectations and the device perspective. What we learned, as I said already, some of the partner utilities filled in a lower score than perceived by the project team. So that is a very important basis for discussion, of course. And the same, as already mentioned, overestimated their performance. But the discussion about that has been very useful and fruitful. And also that the ambitions are generally quite high, in my opinion, not always realistic. But again, it is a very important basis for the discussion. Um, and yeah, of course, it opens the possibility to talk about the project because the water utilities are very busy in their day-to-day business, and we are very busy implementing the project. And of course, we have partner meetings and steering committee meetings. But this really helped us to look very detailed at what we are doing and how effective it is and where changes needed to be done. And of course, also the quantitative WOP results are very important, and that this really helped us to focus on that and not only talk about KPIs. Yeah, that is my short introduction to this tool. If you have any questions, you can, of course, always contact me. I don't have my email address here, but I'm sure that can be shared. And the tool is also available. It's a very simple Excel tool. If anybody wants it, I can make it available. Thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, let me know.
Thank you so much, Carl. It's great that you decided to co-develop a tool with among mentors and mentees, and mostly that you decided to keep it simple. So simple is a great way to go ahead with monitoring. I don't see yet any questions posted in the chat box, so I encourage participants to post their questions. In the meantime, I have a couple of questions for you, Carl. So you mentioned subjectivity as one of the disadvantages, right? So, and how, in your opinion, you could minimize that? So which is the way forward?
Yeah, of course, subjectivity, that is always their perspective, but we try to minimize that by making it a topic of our discussions. And as we have 4 partners, that also helps because they keep each other in perspective as well. They talk among each other, and yeah, of course, they know each other's performance. So by discussing it and making a topic of discussion, it really helped us to minimize the effect of that.
I see. Thank you for this answer. And another important point that really captured my attention during your presentation is the invisible results that you mentioned. So what are these invisible results? And also, how can you capture those if you rely on a quantitative tool?
Well, the invisible results, in my opinion, are increased capacity on various work processes, which do not immediately reflect in the KPIs. For example, because the perspective has only been 4 years. So, as already mentioned by Maria and Anke, is that that period of time is too short to realize the major changes in KPIs. And also the WOPs contribution to those results is also not always clear. But the invisible results are, in my opinion, is that the leadership has improved, that they are applying change management, the changes happen, that the work processes have improved, that they now have a business plan, that they now have a management information system in place. That it's not always only about NRW reduction, but also those management information systems and the business planning also help to reduce non-revenue water in the end. So those, I call them invisible results because they are the work process that you can really see happening on the ground that have improved and that also help the water utilities a lot. For example, I've seen commercial reporting, the fact that somebody used to work 1 week per month on preparing a commercial report about the sales and the results. By simply introducing them to Excel, simple Excel methods, they could reduce that to, let's say, let's not exaggerate, but 1 hour per month instead of a week, 5 days. So that's a huge improvement that you can never see in any KPI, but it has really improved the quality efficiency, the time reduced, but also the quality of the reports, because there's no more manual data transfer, but everything is based on the data in the systems. So that is what I call invisible results.
Yeah, thank you so much, Carl. It's great to hear about this, and it will also great to add to the debate. So how we include also these invisible results in the monitoring and evaluation in our reporting. I see that Maria raised her hand, so please go ahead, Maria.
Thanks, Juliana, and thanks a lot, Carl. It's super interesting. I just wanted to say that Carl has this double profile, that he's now managing projects in the field, but he's also a great trainer, coach, on the job training. Like he's been for so many years doing that job. And I think these invisible examples that he's giving us are really illustrative of what the changes that you see in the day-to-day happen in the utility that are not visible in KPIs. So I just wanted to say that he's a very good person to illustrate this kind of invisible results.
Thank you very much, Maria, for these compliments. Made me blush.
It's always good to get some compliment. So thank you so much, Carl. If there's any additional question for Carl, please post it in the chat, and then we will discuss it later on at the end of all the other presentations. So thank you so much. We will now move on with the presentation of Dr. Jean Cole from WaterAid, and she will reflect on the lessons learned from monitoring practices in WaterAid's WOPs. Jean, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Juliana. Just share my screen. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. So today I'd like to share some key lessons learned from our monitoring practices in WaterAid WOPs. First, I'll introduce you to the WaterAid WOP context and our partnership approach, because I think it's a little different than a typical WOP. Then I'll present our previous monitoring and evaluation approach, the key lessons learned from our previous projects in M&E, and then introduce you to our renewed WOP M&E framework that's evolved to try to address some of those challenges we faced in the past. So as most of you probably know, WaterAid is an international non-for-profit. We are focused on ensuring everyone everywhere has access to clean water, decent toilets, and good hygiene. We operate in 34 countries, as shown on the map here. And our WOPs could take place in any of our country programs, shown in blue on the map. And each of our country programs will have a country strategy and an overall program for how to achieve WaterAid's mission within that country context. And we take a system strengthening and empowerment approach, which means we look at the entire WASH system. So what this means for WaterAid WOP is oftentimes it's one project within a large overall program that will contain several local national projects. And WaterAid typically will have existing partnerships with the utilities involved in a WOP. It also means that our WOPs can be very different from one another, as they really drive from the specific country context. So WaterAid's been engaging in capacity development projects with WASH service providers for many years. These could be shorter-term technical assistance projects or international training programs or WOPs. And we've been engaging in WOPs since 2014. And due to the success of these projects and the increase we're seeing in professionalized services in the areas we work, we really wanted to scale up WOPs at WaterAid. But before we did that, we first wanted to take a look at our previous WOPs and understand what's been working well, what hasn't worked so well, and what we can do to improve our M&E approach for WOPs and help create a more generalized M&E framework for WOP projects at WaterAid. So unlike a traditional WOP, which tends to be more bilateral, WaterAid WOP has at least 3 partners, WaterAid and the 2 utility partners. And WaterAid plays a role of facilitator, advocate, and project manager in those projects as shown on the screen here. And an important thing to note is that oftentimes the balance of these roles will change over time as the relationship between the utility partners strengthens. WaterAid has core procedures for planning, monitoring, evaluating, and reporting on projects at WaterAid. And this approach was used in our previous WOPs. So a lot of you will be familiar with this approach of in the planning stages, developing a results framework, outlining the outcomes and outputs the project wants to achieve, the activities needed to be done to achieve those, and then the indicators to measure those outputs and the key performance indicators to measure those outcomes. Then we develop a M&E plan, and the project is monitored throughout the project cycle based on that M&E plan. And we have periodic reflection on, evaluate the results and reflect on those to determine if we're achieving our objectives and if changes need to be made to the project. So the first thing we did was take a deeper dive into some of our previous WOPs. And we chose 3 very different WOPs. And what we did was we conducted surveys and in-depth interviews with participants from the different utility partners, as well as from the WaterAid country programs that participated in these WOPs. And we found some key lessons learned from those in terms of monitoring and evaluation. So the first was there's often confusion over the responsibilities and roles of the different partners in M&E and what's the best approach to use. And the general consensus was that the existing tools we were using didn't provide enough evidence of change of the impacts. And a lot of this is because we tend to focus on a lot on performance, and KPIs can be lagging indicators, meaning they don't you don't necessarily see the big results until after the duration of the project. So it's really, this highlighted the need to really track that intermediate progress and the capacity building of the project. The next was a lot of times our baseline assessments were a bit too specific, so we weren't able to fully capture all the unexpected benefits and wider impacts of the projects. And the next, and I'm sure this is common across many WOPs, is just a lack of understanding of how do you capture capacity development in the course of a WOP. And it highlighted the need to try to explain the process for how learning is embedded within an organization, resulting in organizational capacity development, and how might we track that progress throughout the duration of a WOP. And the next was the partnership between WaterAid and service providers was typically monitored, but not all projects monitored the relationship between the service providers. And that this highlighted the need to just be more explicit in terms of our WOP projects at WaterAid, and the need to make sure we're monitoring all 3 relationships. And finally, another very common one was there's a tendency to overemphasize quantitative over qualitative metrics. However, in our detailed interviews with people, it was oftentimes our more qualitative assessments that were done in the projects that had that showed the biggest impacts, and really captured some of the more wider impacts and unexpected benefits. And all the partners and participants frequently mentioned those assessments. So it just highlighted the importance of making sure we're not just taking a quantitative approach, but also including some of those more qualitative metrics as well in our approach. So we're actually in the process of creating our new M&E framework. So it's a work in progress, but there are 3 pillars to our approach, to help address these challenges that we found. The first is monitoring performance. Our core procedures for doing this work very well. So we want to keep that approach, but we've identified a few tools that we want to develop and are in the process of developing to help partners apply those core procedures to the WOP context. So, and I will discuss this in the next few slides. The next was monitoring capacity development in the project, and providing a framework for the steps for capacity development and a way to monitor what to monitor at what time. And the final was monitoring partnership health and ensuring we monitor each all the relationships, all the partnerships, and to ensure continued effectiveness throughout the project, and to make sure we're addressing achieving all the partners' different objectives, and to get an understanding of how those objectives change over time as the project evolves. So in terms of monitoring performance, there are a few tools we're working on to try to help apply the core procedures to WOP context. And the first thing we're working on is trying to develop a tool like common focus areas and improvement areas in a WOP. And I won't go into the specifics of these because we're still working on trying to get the right level of granularity for the improvement areas in this. But I will highlight that we did identify 3 critical improvement areas for all WaterAid WOPs. And the first one, ensuring equity of access to water, as this is core to WaterAid's mission. So this is a critical improvement area for all our WOPs. And the other 2 are embedding learning within the utility and collecting and managing data, because both are crucial for creating a process of continuous learning and data-driven decision-making, which are both crucial to the success of any WOP and for sustainability of changes into the future. Then, in addition to this, we're currently working on a capacity needs assessment tool and a generalized results framework for WOPs that will align with these common focus areas and improvement areas. The next pillar was monitoring capacity building. So here we've tried to provide a framework for doing that. And we didn't create this from scratch. This is influenced by several other models, including the SANS model, and the other ones you can see at the bottom of the page. But first thing we try to do is go through the steps for organizational capacity building, and you can see how it starts. It's focused a little bit more on individual capacity building in the beginning, and then that whole how the learning's embedded slowly into the organization. The drivers put in place to start applying the knowledge in practice, and the tools and financing that help drive the application of that knowledge. And finally, the standard operating procedures and job aids that ultimately help embed all that knowledge into the organization, and ultimately hopefully result in changes in the working routines. And then that has an effect on the indicators. So underneath each of the steps, we have highlighted key things we'd like to monitor at each of those steps. And then on the right, you can see when we would want to monitor those things. And the idea is to apply this to each of the improvement areas that a WOP will focus on, because typically they'll focus on 2 to 3 focus areas and a couple improvement areas in each of those. So tracking the progress in each of the improvement areas in this way, we're hoping will help track the develop capacity development across the duration of the project. And then finally, monitoring partnership health and ensuring we monitor that relationship between the service providers. So here just shows some different aspects of partnership monitoring and evaluation, and some key things we've identified that need to be tracked, or things like who's driving the partnership, and how does that shift over time as a project evolves, and in terms of evaluating the partnership, is it the right match? Are the partners achieving their objectives? How are these things changing over time? And that's it for my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. And this is all a work in progress for us, and we are happy to collaborate on any tools for WOPs. I'm really excited about the tools I've just seen from the other presenters. And are there any questions?
Thank you so much, Jean, for a great presentation. I'm not sure if it's just me that I cannot see your video. But if not, if you could just please check if you can reactivate your camera.
I don't know if it's a bandwidth. Is it on now?
Maybe you can stop sharing.
Oh, yeah, let me stop sharing.
Okay, now I see you. Yeah.
Okay.
So thank you so much.
I guess maybe I handle both.
Yeah, probably. So thank you so much. And it was really amazing to see how you integrated the qualitative and quantitative approach in your assessment of WOPs, and that you relied heavily also on the qualitative information for moving forward and designing your new framework for monitoring and evaluation. So thank you so much for sharing that experience. I have a couple of questions for you, and mainly are linked to your future, the vision that you have moving forward. So you presented a framework for measuring capacity building, and I was just wondering on how you envisaged operationalizing it. So if you can give us some examples about the methods, for instance, that you will like or you will implement.
Yeah, I know it's hard. We're in the process of doing it, but for capacity building, things like, individual capacity building, doing more self-assessments, before and after trainings, and not only about the knowledge, but confidence and ability to apply that knowledge on the job, and ultimately ability to teach others as well within the organization. So capturing those types of things in the evaluations, and from commitment, just stepping through the different ones. Does the organization have plans in place to apply that knowledge and to create the mechanisms, the incentive mechanisms to apply that on the job. And then the presence of the tools and the resources available to apply knowledge on the job as well. So tracking those different things over the course of a WOP is how we're planning on doing it.
No, it's good, and I wish you best of luck with the implementation of the framework, and also look forward to hearing more about it later on. So now I see that we are short in time, so I thank you, Jean. And if there's any other question, I see that there's one. No, okay. I will ask later on if there's still time. So thank you so much once again. And I would like now to call our last speaker, which is Maria Pascual, and she will reflect on the key elements of GWOPA's proposed framework. Maria, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Juliana. Let me bring, okay. Is it visible now?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
But I still we can't see your camera. We cannot see you.
No, I think that's the system that sometimes selects due to the bandwidth. I think it might come later on if I happen to have a better network. Yeah, so maybe we move on.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot. I think it's and yeah, thanks a lot for the presentation. I think it's really interesting to see now explicitly the partnership health being measured and the attempt to really reflect on that. With my presentation, I would like to just also share where are we at in GWOPA with our efforts to show more visibility of WOP results and some of the key elements of our proposed framework. I am going to go back first to the slide that I introduced before on the identified causes of why we're not able to show visibility of results yet. And I'm going to touch upon a bit on the myth of the capacity as black box, a lot on the lack of a monitoring framework that is suitable to WOPs, and then also on two other additional points that I will raise after. Now, key aspects to consider for WOPs, that some of which have already been mentioned. I think especially the practitioners, and I enjoy a lot also hearing from Carl the reality of capacity. You initially intend to do something, and then eventually capacity emerges, and capacity needs emerges, and capacity development emerges sometimes in different ways. So any effort that we can that we want to do on planning capacity, sometimes capacity is a bit slippery at the planning stage, but we can certainly try to capture it once we are monitoring. But we have to use comprehensive frameworks that are not necessarily close to. It's always going to be a framework, so it's always going to be simplification of reality, but at least to allow for the unintended and for wider impact that we initially plan in our work. Now, we've talked a lot also on performance and attribution, and I think one element that I would like also to highlight is that it's very important to, if we want to prove the concept as WOPs, as a sector, it's very important to take a route of going from the project to the results and see how the WOP project has actually achieved and managed to support results on the mentee level. If we are only looking at KPIs, for example, we will never be able to prove concept because there is very little attribution. Same way with capacity. Capacity is not only improved capacity is not only due to the WOP, as we know, of course, it's mainly due to the ongoing capacity development and changes that go on in the utility. And the WOP is only one element. So we really need to look closely at this plausible attribution of what has been achieved to the WOP in order not only to be able to account to donors and stakeholders, but also to learn and to improve our practice. So what we recommend is to not to forget to include capacity developed enhance capacity at the planning stage. If we don't include capacity, enhance capacity, even if it's in a generic way, for example, improve capacity in low income communities service provision, even if it's at a generic level, and we leave it open, later on, if we have a proper framework, we will be able to address, okay, how has capacity been changed? But the capacity needs to be there at the planning stage so that we are now later on forced to really have a close look and see what happened there. Now, in terms of monitoring, we've already talked about outputs that do not equate to enhanced capacity, and outputs do not equate to outcomes. So outputs are only related to the project and how good you are able to deliver what you intended. That doesn't mean that you are making any impact at any level. Now, we are again emphasizing here the bottom-up approach to monitoring and evaluation, depart from the project to see really what the project activities have led to. And that's not to be exclusive, only that just I think it's important to depart from the project and see not causal links, but see how you can identify plausible attribution and plausible contribution of your activities to any changes in the organization. Monitor process as well as results. We said before in the roundtable that monitoring is not only to account for results, but it's especially for improving our projects, for learning about how we are doing. If we do not monitor process, it's very difficult to do that. So an emphasis as well on monitoring process. And then finally, I would like to highlight, it's not that we are proposing to discard KPIs from the results framework on WOPs, far from that. But we should keep being aware of the influence that a WOP can have in a KPI and the long term that it needs. And we can use it more as a guiding light, but certainly not as a proxy for what outcomes are we producing in the short and medium term. So here, I would like just to emphasize a bit more the direction that we are taking to the approach of monitoring and monitoring for WOPs. As we said before, some of the motives were why we are monitoring is accountability to donors, inform project and partnership management and adaptations so that we can keep the project relevant to the reality. Also visibility to key close internal and external stakeholders. What I've seen in many projects is that when doing evaluations is that there is a sense that things are happening, but sometimes, and yesterday we saw it also with the intervention in the European Investment Bank about the WOP project. It was a service called service contract, but it was on capacity development, and they, for example, was involved in that project. Partners, they knew that things were happening, but the KPIs were not evolving, and that created some kind of frustration between partners. You're not reaching your goals. Well, the goals were unrealistic and about what is a WOP about. So I think this is very important. What I would like to highlight here is that the direction that you take of monitoring approach means a lot in terms of what you're actually going to be able to do with it. The first one, top-down approach. As I said before, top-down approach, donors want to see the performance. They want to know how much did you contribute to SDG 6. That's what you're asked to provide. And that's missing a lot of the good that WOPs can contribute to. Then when we talk about monitoring for improving, for management, for making a better project, then we need to depart, and we call it bottom-up approach, from the project, from the reality, from the activities, from the partnership, from the outputs, and later on the capacity outcomes as short and medium-term benefits from the project. And then if you're looking into the visibility to actors, you really also, of course, your partner want to see the outcomes. They want to see the performance outcomes, and if they are not there, they want to see the capacity outcomes. So we need to make them visible. From GWOP's perspective and the proposed approach that we are taking, we are incorporating the three ambitions, and we are focusing mostly, and we are taking a bottom-up approach to that. We depart from the project, and then we go along the way showing and trying to make it visible the plausible contribution of the project to outcomes. Okay. Now, what are we proposing. We are now in our framework, we're focusing very much, as well as the previous speakers, on working processes, working areas. That's the unit of analysis we are zooming in to see what's happening in the process and what's happening as a result of that process, of a partnering process, a peer-to-peer. Now, we will not go in deep. So, of course, all these elements, process, output, capacity outcomes, and performance outcomes, will be part of the results framework that we are proposing. However, I will only go a bit, I will zoom in on the process and on capacity outcomes. How are we proposing to address and to monitor those elements? On the process side of things, on one hand, we are looking at partnership health, and I will elaborate later on how do we want to do that, how do we propose we could do that. And then we're also looking at the peer-to-peer knowledge consolidation process. As I said before, the project of a WOP is a peer-to-peer work process that it's intending to go from an identifying it to a change in a working procedure that later on will lead to performance improvements. So that's something that we are also able to have a closer look and how far are we in that process. So we are proposing that. And then on capacity outcomes, we will also show how we want to monitor capacity. Now let's start with the partnership health, a relatively simple way in which we want to approach and propose that partners engage into this. We are given a set of reference good practice statements related to that we've dig in different theories and best practices on partnership management. And there are some key elements, and of course, this is not set in stone. We can add other criteria, we can remove, partners can decide what's relevant for them that year, but we would like to see that every year there are a few good practice statements about partnership health that are considered for each of the working areas. When I mean each of the working areas, I mean that this is not like a WOP overall assessment. No, because this is depending on individuals. Each team working in the WOP, the team working on non-revenue water reduction, the team working on financial sustainability, the team working on water quality, they will have their own partnership health. They will have their own relationships. So this needs to be looked at that level, at the working unit level, at the peer-to-peer working unit level. Some of the reference statements that we are including here, or the key criteria, are the partnership setup, roles and responsibilities, meeting processes, work processes, communication and transparency, trust and teamwork, partnership adaptation, resources, degree of satisfaction with the process, degree of satisfaction with results. These are, as I said, many, but we encourage at least picking what seems more relevant for each of the teams in the project. As an example, we're giving some good practice statements, not as a blueprint, but as a reference for partners to reflect. In the meeting processes, for example, we have partners are regularly and consistently present at meetings. The representation is at an appropriate senior level or operational level. Meetings happen with appropriate frequency. Setting agendas and arranging meeting logistics ensures inclusivity of all partners, etc., etc., etc. Just to illustrate that there are some good practices that are widely recognized on partnership management that partners should just keep as a reference point to see how well are we doing, can we improve on a recurrent annual basis. And then, of course, I won't go into details into how we measure this unless it's later on asked, but it's a quantitative measure first. You accept, or you try to assess, okay, degree of good practice, and then partners, ideally both partners, contribute to the assessment, and they decide, okay, well, here we're doing a bit low or good or fairly good. The practice is described, and then they identify if that is a key priority for future planning cycle, if that's something that they need to improve on. Okay. Now, so that's how we are proposing to look into partnership health. The next one is on what I mentioned also about the process, the peer-to-peer process of knowledge consolidation into change. We know that the partners engage and start the project together, and they go through different stages. All the projects go through those stages, regardless of the working process that they are working on, that they are focusing on. And that goes from the beginning, a shared view on what capacity is missing or what needs to be changed, to eventually at the other side of the spectrum, once the new knowledge has been created, once conditions for change have been created, once new working routines have been embedded, and those working routines are functioning well, that's the other side of the spectrum. So we know the different stages that can that do materialize in a peer-to-peer knowledge exchange for each working area, for all the working areas. So we want to also be able to trace this in a simple way. And eventually what we would like to see is, okay, well, each project can easily monitor for each of the working areas, where are we at? Are we at the level of specifying or trying to address needs, identify what are the main needs? Are we at the point of having agreed on a course of action to address those needs in terms of knowledge and other conditions for change? Are we now at the point in which now we see that the conditions have been created, but we don't see yet it applied in the working routines? Or are we now where we have now established well working routines? There are some simple stages that we can also monitor, and that will give us a sense of where is the project at each working area. In one project, you might have one working area very well advanced in the process, another working area that it has just started. But with having that sense of each working area and each project, we are able at least to have a visible picture as well, which is also something that we need to work on, visibility, a visible picture of how different projects are working. And this is just a very simple illustration on, okay, if you think of a different color for each working area, you can see different projects have progressed differently in different contexts and different regions, but you can actually have a picture of how far each project has gone in each of the working areas that they are targeting, okay? And then finally, and it's complementary to this one, this is looking a lot at the process, but then what are the actual implications, the actual invisible, as Carl was suggesting, that now they need to become visible and we need to make them more visible. What are the changes at the organizational level? So now we go into, if you want to say, and in the platform that we are developing, this behaves a bit like you first show the degree of knowledge consolidation, and then you click there, and then it displays what are the changes that you have been able actually to materialize in the organization. And here we're using evidence from practice, as I mentioned before, from different case studies that have been analyzed, but also an organizational framework. This is Burke and Litvin in 1992, that serves very well to illustrate different elements in the organization that might be undergoing an improvement to which a WOP has contributed. So I will just highlight here some of them. The more common one at the individual level, motivation, individual skills, and application of knowledge. Then at the middle operational level, structure, management practices, systems. As Carl was saying before, no, what are those invisible changes? And we were talking about working processes. We were talking about the management information systems. We were talking about equipment. That if it's embedded and used within the organization, then that means increased capacity. So those are elements that we can capture here. And then an element that is not so easily influenced by WOPs, but at times it has happened, are more strategic factors of the organization that could look at issues of leadership, as Carl also suggested in his presentation. Leadership changes, not only at top level, but also at operational levels. Organizational culture, mission and strategy, etc. We are also incorporating the external environment, and this has been rarely the case, but we know of cases, and I am going to illustrate or just mention an example in Mozambique many years ago, where a long-term project also connected to investments, also a project that broke the project cycle boundary and extended through a long period of time that was vague, also had an influence or supported the development of a new organizational sector setup in the country. How much of an influence? Of course, well, you can argue, but they were contributing to a new development of the organizational setup. So the external environment is also there. We've also seen also from evaluations of Waterworks that, and Anke can of course reiterate that point later on, that it's very difficult to maneuver within the water utility sphere if you really want to make sustainable changes. The enabling environment, and we know that, but I think when it comes from practices also, like it really re-emphasized that we need to work at the enabling environment. And as such, I think Waterworks is for phase 2 incorporating possibilities to work more intensely in the enabling environment. So we are incorporating also the possibility to monitor any changes in the enabling environment, and also we are incorporating others to also leave to the unintended capacity changes, unintended benefits on the utility that were not planned for, that are not included in this framework, but that happened. And I think in that sense, maybe Anke can also elaborate later on a bit, but in some cases, for example, you can see the leverage with investments in the Waterworks program, with all the investments that are being linked to the project. I must say that this is not unintended in the Waterworks program, because of course they had initially planned for that, but in other projects it could be an unintended initially capacity outcome, but that along the way partners decide to apply or to try to support the acquisition of investment projects. Okay, and because of time,
Maria, apologies. Yes, indeed. If we can wrap up.
Yes, thanks a lot for the heads up, Juliana. The final slide that I would like to give is just to say, we are, well, the two final slides. These efforts into addressing capacity invisible results and are now being consolidated in a specific platform that WOPA has been developing for the last years. It has different stages, and now I think it's at a point when we are very close to start using it. The EU WOPs program is the first one that will be starting to use this platform, and what we can do with that is we are trying to make it as easy as possible for WOP practitioners to insert their project, to insert their results framework data, to monitor, to visualize progress. I think this is an important one, especially when we're looking at the invisible part, because we will be able to make it visible, and not only the, let's see, mentor, manager will be able to visualize progress, but also it could be also shown to the mentee side of things, or key stakeholders, where that can also help in that element of trust and that things are going into a good direction. The platform will also allow for easy reporting. So once you have the data there, it's easy reported in a PDF file, export, download, and it will basically also encourage and support very much the fact of having in one platform the possibility for WOP practitioners to easily monitor and give visibility to results in WOPs. And on the other hand, on the side of GWOPA, will allow for the umbrella organization with the mandate of upscaling the practice to have a better picture of what are the results that we are able jointly to achieve. And I would just like to end up with the last 2 points in which we were seen as identified causes of the lack of visibility, not enough coordination between GWOPA and QWOP practitioners on methodologies. This is something that we are addressing with different key partners at the moment, but I would like to just emphasize that there is a session next week on data management. It's called the Global WOPs Observatory Data Management, for those of you who want to participate. And then the last point on WOPs professionals that we were saying, they are not necessarily related or familiar with capacity development frameworks or report writing lovers. And for this, it's a reality, and it's something that we are trying to address in many ways. One is the platform that we have developed. Another one is different specific trainings that we will be doing online for being able to use the platform, and also specific ones on capacity monitoring. And the third one that I would like to highlight is the online community that I mentioned before, in which these kind of issues, these kind of challenges can also be shared. There is also a session on the Congress next week on how WOPs can boost your career as a professional, that will also be present in the online community that WOPA is setting up for this. So with this, I finish my presentation, and thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Maria, and apologies to the audience for going slightly over time. Maria, I have tons of questions, but I think I will have to hold them for myself in the interest of time. And I just go to one question that was raised already by the audience for Jean. That is the question on monitoring the also partnership. If she can very briefly address this point and reflecting on the experience of WaterAid. And then I think I will have to move to the wrap up. Maria, you're still sharing your screen, I think. Okay, Jean, if you can just very, very quickly address.
Yeah, so we do monitor our partnerships in WOPs. So WaterAid has an existing tool, so that that's been used to monitor relationships. We're in the process of seeing how we could adapt that to ensure we're monitoring that trilateral partnership better. But we found with our WOPs that the more if partners set aside that time to have these regular checkups and are open and transparent about the partnership relationship, and the more open that discussion is between all the partners, we found the more successful the WOPs are. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jean. And Maria, I see that there was a question from the audience also for you. And I think this is the last one we will take, and then we will wrap up. It was partially answered by the platform that you presented, but the key question is, how do you plan to test the new monitoring and evaluation framework that you are developing?
Yes, I think that the guests, the audience, saw the answer with the platform. But in terms of timing, the EU WOP program WOPs are the ones that are going to be using them first. We've been internal testing, we've been reflecting with projects already on the use of that. And we are fully aware that this is not, as I said, a blueprint or a fixed approach. I think we need to remain flexible, and we also need to listen to the needs of key stakeholders that need to use, or ideally find it attractive enough to use the tool, to make it as comprehensive as possible and to capture as many projects as possible. So whatever we are going to propose and the platform that is going to be launched will keep evolving with time. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Maria, and sorry for rushing you at the end. I will just wrap up with some concluding remarks. It was an exciting session. I really enjoyed it, so thank you for inviting me here, Maria. So what we learned today: short and medium-term results in WOPs are dependent on capacity enhancement in the mentee organization. So we're all in agreement with this point. It is obvious that there's the need to show, like Maria was saying, at different levels, whether this capacity enhancement is taking place and how. Yeah. And the good news is that, as we've seen in this session, there are different organizations that have identified this common need and are working towards developing different solutions for this point. In fact, the session has shown examples of using monitoring practices, and they show complementary and common points. So it was very interesting to see that. A point that we really didn't touch upon is the harmonization. So do we need to harmonize this kind of monitoring and evaluation of WOPs, and how can we do that? So this, I think we will leave it for one of the next sessions to discuss. And in conclusion, I think that we should all make an effort to keep working together for the same goal. And what we ultimately want is to trace how and to which degree WOPs can contribute to capacity enhancement. So then our follow-up actions will be to build, so to gear it towards maximizing capacity development based on the lessons learned. So with this kind of very short and rushed remarks, I would like to thank the speakers for the great contributions, and thank all the audience for the interactions and for their time. So thank you all, and look forward to seeing you in other sessions.
Thanks, everyone. A
Thanks,
pleasure.
goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
What? Already over?
No, we have plenty more options to continue the discussions and peer exchange beyond the Congress.
Tell me more. What are the options?
Well, SHIWOPA membership, for example. By becoming a member of SHIWOPA, everyone can connect to a global alliance of practitioners and experts. There are two ways of becoming a member. First, institutional members. Institutions can participate in SHIWOPA's assemblies and are eligible to run and vote in its international steering committee elections. Or second, individual members. Individuals can connect and engage with peers in the online SHIWOPA community. We have created a space that allows for networking and easy communication. Meet future WOP partners, stay up to date on project opportunities, and participate in peer-to-peer learning opportunities.
Sounds great. How can I join?
Simply go to www.shiwopa.org and register for free. If you want to know more, you can follow SHIWOPA on social media and subscribe to the newsletter. Thanks for joining the 4th Global WOPs Congress. We'll see you soon.